Dr. Bhalla, is demonetization good for the economy or not?
We'll find out. But in principle, my view is that this is a mega, has a potential, and I want to underline potential, for being a very big bang reform. And by implication or by assumption, a big bang reform is not only good for the economy, is very good for the economy. How it plays out and what are the additional policies that will come about, hopefully, will determine whether it is a big bang. And if nothing follows from this, if this is an end in itself and everything else stays the same in India, then I think this is a big thud and with very few advantages. So the perspective has to be, in my opinion, that this thing is part of a process, is part of a package of reforms, and a package of reforms that will become known in a short period of time. So it's not over 3 years, it's not over 4 years, it's not over 2 years, it's not even over 1 year. I think if this thing has to have meaning, it has, and the bank, we'll know soon enough. And if it doesn't, we'll also know soon enough.
And how soon is that soon enough?
I think fortuitously, or maybe it's part of the plan, the budget is going to be presented on February the 1st. So I think that'll be the watershed moment. We've had one watershed moment, which was November the 8th. And I think between now and then, and especially on February the 1st, we'll know what this government has in store for the economy and for the polity and for the politics and for the election. So this is, one has to appreciate the fact that this is a radical step and has never been undertaken by any economy not suffering from hyperinflation. And we are not suffering from hyperinflation. Matter of fact, inflation is somewhere around 4.5%. So this thing is radical by any definition.
What would be your advice to the finance minister as a continuum of what has happened on 8th November?
I think the advice has to be, or I feel very strongly, that the tree of black money, the black economy, has been cut. But the roots are all there. So therefore, a prudent finance minister, a prudent policy would suggest that you get rid of the roots. Otherwise, the color of Indian and the blood of Indian and the habits of Indian are not going to change if all you do is come up with this demonetization. So you have to get at the roots, and the roots have to be as to what creates black money. What are the incentives for creation of black money? And you've got to try and get at those incentives to change completely towards non. So tax compliance is a big issue. And therefore, what do you do about tax rates? The second big issue is that the one real sink of black money is the real estate sector. And you've got all kinds of duties, the stamp duties, the capital gains tax, etc., which give you very little revenue. It gives the tax people lots of revenue. It gives the black money guys lots of revenue. And you can easily have a measure that 50% is, if you will, legal and 50% is illegal. Somebody's making that money.
Possibly more than 50%.
Possibly more. So somebody is making a lot of that money. Now you need to get rid of that. You need to, and the third one is electoral reform. We need to really change the way we finance elections, much more transparent than has been. So, life is not the same, the economy is not the same, the politics is not the same post November 8th and pre-November 8th. And I think we'll all be making a mistake if we think that, just this little incident happened and it's back to business as usual. I don't think so. I think the probabilities are very low that it'll be business as usual. I think it'd be big tragedy if it is back to business as usual.
Mr. Chebar, you heard Dr. Bhalla, you have a point of view on this. short-term impact, and how do you define medium-term and long-term? Or what should be our expectations from this change? Let's put it this way.
The US had 9/11, and we have had our 8/11 or 11/8 as we call it. Big bang reform, but Mao did a cultural revolution, Big Bang reform. Stalin did collectivization, Big Bang reforms. Ill thought through, not properly conceived, not properly consulted reform can also be a big disaster for India. India seemed to have everything going for it. We were now touted, whether you believe the new GDP numbers or not, fastest growing economy in the world. Modi ji was going around the world saying we are the best. And then at that time, to take a measure without any consultation, a measure that is associated with some of the most decrepit economies of the world, to come up with this scheme for India at this stage, when even the new President Trump was saying India is the one that I have to look at to see how to get growth going, boggles the mind, quite frankly. And I mean, the intent is good, but such a ham-handed approach to economic policy making could end up being just a thud, but could also end up being quite a disaster. And even that NGO that is supposed to have given this idea has disowned the particular move that the government has made. If Mr. Modi can pull this off, then of course he will go down in history as one of the biggest economic revolutionaries. The issue is, I think, what Surjit said, which is we have, there are so many estimates, but we say a quarter of our GDP is in black wealth, kala dhan as we call it. At best, as figures that I know, 5-6% of that is in cash,
right,
black money. So when we are saying 5-6%, we are talking about 1.5% of GDP. Even if you get half of that, you got maybe 0.5 to 0.75% of GDP out of this move. If your economy dips by 1%, you already lost all that. And if you go on with more such measures, which bring back the Inspector Raj and kill all the ease of doing business, I don't know what the World Bank doing business ranking will appear after this, but if you do all that, then you could end up with shaving off 2-3% growth in the long run. How have countries reduced corruption globally? They haven't done it by demonetization. They have done it by the kind of things he was talking about, by tax reform, by going at real estate transactions, by going into this hawala business and trying to get a handle on that, by better monitoring of lavish expenditure.
Maybe
people
that will
have gone
follow.
about
Maybe
it in a
that
very
follow.
systematic way. But that's the systematic way to go about it, not by knocking off 85% of your currency overnight and then expecting that will end up creating some sort of a miracle. If you ask me,
I think
are there other ways in which this could have been done? I would have.
No, Ajay, to be fair to both the voter as well as the person responding, that everybody, since it was just done, everybody knows what has happened. So it is, you're taking
It's a large sample
whole
size.
view as to is this a good move or bad move. People know what has happened. They've stood in lines, the cash is hard to come by, etc. And my view is, I'm surprised that the number is that high. But I wouldn't question the phrasing.
Yeah, but you're right. Some people would obviously say that it's a good move, and then go on to say what could have been better. And anyway, even if you're not for it, in a survey, possibly some people will say, of course, it's the right things to say. So, of course, there could be that error of some percentage.
So, this move has to be seen in the context of what has happened in the past and what may happen in the future. We went straight to the future. You've got to look at the past first. And of course, with any black money issue, there is the flow and the stock. And I'll be very frank, if I was the chief economic advisor, I would not have recommended this move. So what is it? So let's come back to the economics. So what is the economic problem? What is the pain? So think of currency as two parts. Okay, one is what we call the transaction demand. Well, I don't have to tell you, you're a business guys, right? You know what transaction demand is, and the other is the stock demand, right? For storage and for large transactions, which I'll also come to if you're interested, on the real estate, the impact which I think most economists are underestimating. Okay, so that's another special topic, which is a positive part. I don't know what exactly has to be replaced, but the moment that currency transaction demand is replaced, all these negative effects will disappear. The problem is, its 2 weeks are over. If they can do it within a month, that effect will be quite small. I think for the year as a whole, my estimate would be about 0.2% fall in growth from whatever we each thought. I mean, I have my own estimate which I gave in March, but everybody will have their estimate from whatever their estimate is, about 0.2%. If they can't do it within a month, there'll be a bigger effect. So it all depends on that. It's critically dependent on replacement of the transaction demand for currency, because you have a forced disintermediation. You know, when there is no transaction money, things collapse.
Absolutely.
That was my first point. Remember that. When there's zero currency, everything ceases. Stamp duty, okay, has to fall. Has to be reduced, because this is an outdated tax from British days, you know, because they wanted to give something to the local guys. They gave stamp duty.
And the British don't use it anymore.
Yeah. So we are left with this trap. I mean, what else to call it? I don't know. It's a bad tax.
Right.
Okay.
And again, it benefited the whole ecosystem that was in.
That's right.
Lower
Because,
stamp duties, evasion.
Sorry for this,
Yeah.
but then stamp duty essentially is to do with the state governments.
Yes.
The state
And
government.
as you know, the state governments have not really been, except for 2 or 3, have not been cooperating with the center on this. So
fact-
how do we proceed further?
In fact, 9 states yesterday on Monday wrote to the Prime Minister
well,
about it.
The first thing is to make this an issue of black money. I mean, it's all the Prime Minister an expert at that. Okay.
Black money?
Let him do it.
And it is related to black.
Yeah, it's very closely related to black money. Okay.
And he can get his own governments to do it.
Sure.
Okay. So.
As in the
yeah,
BJP
unless
government.
you have more questions, I
Yeah,
can
we
go.
can
But I'm
go to
going to
Mr.
end.
Gurumurthy.
But just the final point. After real estate, there's jewelry and hawala. That will be less affected, you know, because again, jewelry is, there are two differences. You see, real estate, the price is kind of arbitrary. It's
Dependent
whatever
on
people are
supply.
willing to
It's
pay.
also dependent on supply. In golf links, you know, it depends
That's right,
on
but
supply.
it's much more than that. It's what you believe. You know, let me contrast with jewelry. It's gold. Gold has an international price. It cannot fall below it. Similarly, hawala, you're getting dollars, let's say, right? There's an international price. There's no such thing in real estate. It's very arbitrary.
You know, demonetization is a step you might have had to take, but it's a symptom of what went wrong and what has been wrong in this country all these years. So I don't blame the Modi government for it. They've been part of this, and the Vajpayee government has been part of it. So, you know, everybody's been a part of this. We've allowed the system to go and grow and prosper in this country. So, you know, so it's coming back to visitors. So demonetization by itself, I'm got, you know, half inclined towards it and against it. You know, sometimes it's very drastic also. But if the Prime Minister in his wisdom and the RBI in its wisdom and the others thought it was necessary, I'd say, okay, good, we've done it. But the way they've implemented it, the way they've enacted it, the way they've put it, is absolutely stupid. It shows people out of touch with reality, out of touch with what's happening in the world, how the world functions. You're totally out of reality. And the kind of pain it's going to inflict, they've been out of touch with that also. To make this a war between rich and poor is the most absurd thing I've come across. Right now, the Prime Minister going around the country selling this as, you know, a war on the rich. और आपको आपके खून जिसने चूसा इतने साल में उनको
Punish कर रहा हूँ.
This is not the way you create class warfare in this country. And you might sell that idea to some people for some time till the reality bites you. The reality is that 74 or 75% of the daily wage earners are in the unorganized sector, either farm workers or in construction or in retail, small retail, and and in small manufacturing. So they have been hit today. For weeks together, they have been without employment and without daily wages. First question I would ask any politician is, how did you become an MP? How much black money did you use? What did you declare? Last elections, this government, this ruling party estimated to spend 18,000 crores. Most of it money moved by Hawala from Dubai. Congress party spent a little less, but also did they draw it from banks? Did they take demand drafts? So, so let's not kid ourselves. These guys are heavily invested in the system. And unless we get a systemic overall, you're not going to go anywhere.
Just on focusing on the GDP, if you had to see the GDP in the next 3 years, do you think it'll be more than 8% or less than 8%? If you had to make a prediction.
I think, we picked up the Chinese habit of putting a little water into the numbers. And I think we've watered it. If you want to compare against the past, then you've got to go back to that basis. And, and there's these things of irreconcilables and all that piling up, So I would not subscribe to this GDP figure.
That I think the thrust of your question, and Ajay did answer that, it shouldn't be a number, but is from whatever the estimate one had of what the GDP growth was, maybe it was 0%, 1%, 2%, whatever it is. Let's not get, will this and hopefully other reform measures, in one's opinion, accelerate the growth rate or decelerate the growth
Absolutely.
rate? So let him answer that and I'll answer from my
I
side.
would say it's going to slow it down because there is an
Decelerate.
effect.
Yeah.
It's clear.
There's an impact on
unequivocal.
that. There's an impact on that. But on the other hand, reforms are needed. But they have to be holistically conceived, not for immediate political gains, and not to divide the country even further between the haves and have-nots. That you should leave that job to the communists and who are being nicely marginalized because of that. But this kind of populism is not going to get us anywhere.
Fair point.
Can I?
So Virmani, yes, sir.
I have already given my GDP estimate, which was 0.2% effect for the whole year, below my estimate. Obviously, everybody has their own estimate, right?
No, I don't.
So I gave it relative to the my estimate, and for the whole year. I'm not talking about quarters. Many estimates which you will see are for this particular quarter. Okay, so just be careful in representing that. Just very briefly, on things which need to be done. Again, I have it in my blog, but I must mention two factors. People are assuming that tax collection can only go up if GDP goes up. Again, my point is that declaration will go up, okay, because of the nature of the demonetization. Okay, again, the people who are theoretical sitting in Cambridge, England or US don't understand how our economy operates, and so I am saying very explicitly that despite what happens to GDP, the declaration for this year 2016-17 will be higher, and therefore the revenue collected from income tax will be higher. Please note this very carefully what I'm saying. Okay.
But so is that a once-off? That's just a once-off.
Yeah.
But the base will
so
enlarge.
Can,
You'll have to,
can I just complete? So what that means is if you want to sustain it, you must reduce the rates from this budget, okay, and reform the income tax, because the personal income tax, that has not received attention. Remember, I mentioned GST and I mentioned CIT. That's already on the agenda. What is not been on the agenda is the income tax. So I would bet, along with Sujit has already said this, that the personal income tax will be reformed in the next budget. Okay, will be. I'm giving you a prediction. Okay, and the rates will be reduced, the effective rates, because there's no other way
so
to
you're
sustain
saying
it.
till 5 lakhs there'll be no, hopefully
No, what
no.
exactly will be, I have no idea. But I'm willing to take a bet on it. I'm making a prediction. Okay.
Been doing a lot of work on private investment, and if you look at our history of growth, it is a period when we got out of the Hindu growth rate was when we were able to get private investment going, right? So that is what will get us to this higher
real
growth rate
jobs.
path. Now, one of the factors that has been really a dampener, especially on corporate private investment, is the fact that they are very heavily dependent on credit from the banking system. And because of this NPL problem, some of it brought by these infrastructure projects, that flow of money has been choked to some extent. So to the extent that this whoosh of money comes into the banking system, which it has, and they can find a way to, and as all the bankers that I'm hearing, I heard the SBI chairman, hearing the HDFC, all are saying we'd like to, of course they've quickly lowered the deposit rate, which is to their favor. They haven't done anything on the lending rate, but
It will come
it's not
down.
the rate itself, it's the amount of credit that has to get out. That maybe they can do something there. On the non-corporate side, actually, the short term, there will be a big hit.
Already
Because
is.
of all the reasons that everybody's talked about. But, that's something that the budget should focus on. How do we get this small, medium? I mean, I don't think that Mudra Bank is enough for this. They have to start looking at the non-bank financial sector, because that's where the money comes for the SME sector, and how to get rates much lower there. That could be one area. Tax collection, I don't know, maybe they'll get a little more, but and that can be put into the other factor that
Infrastructure.
that crowds in private investment is public investment, especially in infrastructure. If they can put more money there, then that can be something that he needs to do. So I'm just, looking for the silver lining. There
Good way to
could be
look.
some, but
Also
my
just-
worry is that the other factors will
Yeah.
outweigh.
All our friends in the American company CEOs, most of them view it as positively. I talked to 3 very big global CEOs.
Oh, really?
They view it very, and they're not being nice. They know that Anurag is talking to them to get a sense what they feel. So they see it as a start of reforms. They actually see, so they hope other things happen, but they see it very positively. And Dr. Balla, for many years I've been reading your columns, and you talked about fiscal deficit. Finally, the fiscal deficit will substantially reduce because of this. Again, how accounting, how do you account for but the fiscal deficit, both in terms of the tax base being widened, more collections, this RBI not having a liability of between 4 lakh to 5 lakh crore, if that is happening, and the collections have gone up, and he's talking of public investment going up, what does it do to infrastructure? I'm assuming all this is happening. Do you agree, first of all this will happen?
Look, let me give it a slightly longish answer, but I will explicitly answer. I think it's unfair, to assume or to believe and judge this associated with the budget as having solved all our problems.
Of course.
And it's not going to do that. We are not all going to be 100% truthful and 100% non-corrupt and all the rest of it. The question has to be, I always claim that the biggest word in the policy language is a Greek word called delta. What is the difference? The delta is what we all economists use as a change. So what is the change? I think on that criteria, and it can come about to the fiscal deficit, it can come about to tax revenue, it can come about to lower inflation, it can come about to lower corruption. I think the totality, I believe very, very strongly that, and I want to bring in what I said earlier, we don't have a template. None of us do have a template for this. Otherwise, what does an economist do? As soon as some policy comes about, you go and Google search and you go and look at your data that you've collected from the past or whatever for different countries. The world has 204 countries. We've got pretty good data for 60 years. You can count the number of observations. This is unique. Hasn't happened before. And I think the other evaluation that all of us should do, whether we are pro for the policy or against the policy, is recognize as a politician, and this is where I take some disagreement, as a politician, Modi has gone against his core support base.
The traders.
Yeah, the traders. We were brought up, you were part of the BJP, I wasn't, but we were all brought up with the notion that BJP is a party of small traders.
Yes.
okay, small businessmen, etc. Apart from some other strange things that they tagged along the way. But dominantly it was a party of small traders, and the small traders are the ones, and they are the ones who don't pay taxes, along with lawyers and doctors, etc. But the small traders are the ones who have a lot of cash black economy. The big industrialists are not the ones with the cash economy, for reasons we all know, that is long gone. So, do we need to interpret Modi's view that why would a person, a politician mind you, in a democratic country, this is not some arbitrary ruler, is going against his core support base? So I think that might be a very fruitful way of beginning to investigate what might happen. If somebody is willing to do this, then why is he doing it? Is he mad? One option is he's mad because he doesn't intend to do anything else, and he's going after his core support base, and he's saying, okay, political suicide.
No, he's enhancing his support base.
Yeah. So
In my
he
view.
must think, I think, because I think he's not insane, he must think that there will be benefits on the political side. And he can't get benefits on the political side unless he does something to enhance jobs, growth, incomes, you name it. So therefore, I think let's look at it in a historical, in a context where this thing is no template, no experience, is bold for that reason. Now, let's wait and see. I think
and it's risky because there is no template.
It's risky, precisely.
You can't be sure.
Otherwise, we
let's
know
go one way or the other.
It's the unknown unknowns. When you take a risk, you have a probability distribution. You have some idea as to where it might fall. This one is the unknown unknown.
So, Dr. Balla, someone rightly said today that Modi and the BJP had promised the people development, jobs, and clamp down on black economy. So, development and jobs probably didn't happen, so they had to do this,
Okay, let's okay. It's an important point you raise. I happen to think, okay, and I've done lots of academic papers, non-academic papers, etc., that the Indian economy, particularly in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, has done fantastically well. Okay? And it's not just I happen to think, you should believe me. I can give facts and figures and statistics and evidence, and you can say, well, all statistics lies, damn lies and statistics. You might do that. But really, just go down the line as to what has happened. Arvind already documented the various measures that have been taken. Policy measures that have been taken. That didn't arise in a vacuum. They were not, I didn't hear anybody say that they will diminish the growth rate of the Indian economy. So they have enhanced. I think, basically the period from 2004-5 happens to be completely coincident with the UPA 10 years, were a disaster, were absolute disasters for the Indian economy. I think Modi has helped to change the perception of me, of everybody else, that this is no longer a disastrous economy. Now, he might change and might smile and saying, but I think, I've been writing a column called No Proof Required for the last decade. And, every 3 years, somebody comes up and says, can you think of a better one or something? I said, every time I try and think of a better one, that describes India perfectly, describes the policy cognitivity perfectly. We do not, let me just now finish. We don't believe in evidence, okay? That is why I call my column No Proof Required, because in India, you can, either you say, I'm doing it for the poor, and then of course you don't need any evidence because you're doing it for the poor, or you say what you believe without any attempt at backing it up with empirical evidence. That's my view, okay? That is why I think if you now, and that is, if you will, by implication, your view, the economy hasn't done anything, this, that. Your inflation rate has fallen from 10% to 4%. This, I'm sure all the critics in the world will agree, has been a big achievement on the macroeconomic side. So before we get to bloody growth rate and whether the GDP is reliable or not, just give credit where it is due, yeah. This economy is substantially different than it was between.
How about commodity prices?
Yeah, we'll come to that.
No, but to say that
Come on.
I've done it. Okay, I'll come to that right now. I'll come to that right now.
Let me finish. Now, during the UPA period, you actually wrote a series of articles saying that the poverty, incidence of poverty is coming down, and the government has done a great job. They had a good record on GDP. It was coincidental, because I think that average 7.8% for the decade is never going to come back again.
Yeah.
It was a flash in the pan. And it coincided with Manmohan Singh, because some of the groundwork was done in the previous regime also. But, so we tend to equate things with regimes. Not necessarily true. If inflation came down, oil prices came down, all commodity prices came down, there was oversupply of steel, oversupply of cement, and that is a major factor in the basket of goods. You look at food price inflation, gone up, everything gone up. And that is what concerns 70% of the people.
Implicitly, with numbers, answers your question of whether it had anything to do with oil prices or
It
not.
doesn't make it the truth.
Huh? Sorry?
no proof
You can
required.
send it, no proof required. It's not proof.
So I see you don't have an answer to anything I say, so therefore you throw back whatever I'm saying. Yeah.
But I think we can debate growth rates and inflation rates and causes for till the cows come home, as they say.
And
But-
sorry to interrupt. In India, we debate the existence of gravity, whether it's 32 feet per second squared or 31.999 feet per second squared.
But I mean,
Or whether
your
there's
question
gravity at all.
is, I think, the very good one, because you're halfway through the regime, right?
Exactly 30 months.
And exactly. And
Tomorrow
then,
will be 30 months.
And then sort of surgical strike halfway through the regime, knowing that there will be a short-term dip, hoping that this will all be forgotten by the time we reach 2019, and knowing I sort of disagree on the growth rates, but I think the enormity of the numbers that you raised, 12 million needed, can't even create less than a million of jobs. I mean, that enormity must have struck Mr. Modi, and he must have realized, now I have to go to some, you called it class warfare, but Mrs. Gandhi called it Garibi Hatao. And that kind of strike on wealth, in those days we had bank nationalization and all those things that got us into deeper and deeper into a mess.
The original step of demonetization was taken to bring down corruption, the whole idea and the notion of corruption. But yesterday, ACB caught a Zilla Parishad officer taking corruption in the form of new notes. So as you said, the branches have been cut, but the root is still there. So is it in the perception as to how the root will cut, if anyone could answer that?
One is election funding reform. Okay, I mean there are lots of people who have written about it. Every reform you can say cannot be implemented, and that's a fair viewpoint. But you don't know it till you try it. Lots of reforms everybody said can't be implemented. They have been. The second is reform of the police legal and system. Again, the template is already there. There is that court case. Okay. Now the point is, I keep criticizing the media. We take up all kinds of silly issues, but nobody, and I criticize every day, so I'm not doing it for the first time, that you don't take up this issue of police reforms. It's template is there. It's not me who are telling you. There is a court case what was his name? Rajendra Singh, the ex-police guy. Prakash Singh. The Supreme Court has given an order. Why doesn't anybody talk about it? Okay. So you have to do these two things. Because in my view, I mean, Surjit and I differ a little bit here. Surjit focuses only on tax evasion. I have been repeatedly saying that the more deadly stuff is this, political, Babu, police, mafia nexus. And for that, unless you do these two things, you are absolutely correct. It started the next day. Quite right.
I've stood in these lines for about 3 days, and it's very clear that the people in the lines are the poor. Okay,
Right.
there are no wealthy people standing in line to change their money or get money. And let's talk about the rural poor who've clearly taken the biggest hit in demonetization. What can they hope to reap over the next 2 years from this policy? What will change for them? What will become better for them from demonetization?
Talking about the rural poor taking a hit from demonetization, what you must mean is that the little jobs that they had, those jobs are no longer there.
Yes. Also, the loss of employment, standing in line, going, they don't have access to ATMs, they don't have access to bank fees.
If, okay, it is standing in line.
Short term
if
and
they
long term.
have, the poor by definition do not have too much money. That would be a definition of the poor. If we're talking of the bottom 50%,
Yes.
then the total monthly consumption of the bottom 50% is about 6,000 rupees per person per month.
Yes.
So therefore, you have been allowed, and the further down you go, you don't need, you're not spending 6,000 rupees. So therefore, if you're standing in line to have the 4,000 rupees that you have saved, and that's a one-time shot, you are not standing in line to get money out of the bank because you don't have bank access. So how much is so the person has lost 6 hours, 8 hours?
So,
I mean, so maybe what you mean is a loss in jobs, that the economy is coming to a crashing halt,
Yes.
and therefore he doesn't get any employment anymore.
So it's
if
both.
that is the
And
case,
the sentiment being low.
it's
if that
both.
is the
It's
case,
both. Yes.
then what is the evidence? And I will be, in my article on Saturday, I'll be trying to look at evidence that that is the case. But that has to be, again, empirically established.
And again, traders were coerced into saying 1 lakh, and it was a large volume, part of that. So
There's a I mean you have a good point, but those schemes were failing because, as even Rajiv Gandhi is quipped to have said, 1 रुपया government allocate करती है, 15 पैसा, 15 पैसा gets there. Maybe these days things had improved a little bit. My estimate when I was heading that evaluation office was that it had probably improved to about 25%. Not so 25 पैसे जाते थे for every rupee out there. But still, by the time that money trickles down from Delhi to the states, down to these schemes and gets to the people, 75 is kind of lost in the system, right? But demonetization is the opposite. Now you're saying, I'm going to swipe everybody's money out in one big sponge and then re-put it back. This is not, in a way, government money. This is, you have a note which says, I promise to pay you so many 100 rupees or 1,000 rupees. This is your money, and you're being now blocked from getting access to your own money. That's a different issue of getting access to a government scheme, which is, kind of yours by right, because that's what the government intended it for, whether it's Manrega or whether it's IDS or whatever the scheme is. But so there's a slight difference here. This is your private wealth being on one stroke in an 8/11, what do you call it, surgical strike. Your wealth, whatever little you had, if you had 600 rupees or 6 crore rupees, suddenly is
Gone.
meaningless, gone, right? So this is a very different animal from government.
No,
welfare schemes.
I just have to be very, very careful. There is the transactions. There's less cash in the system than there was before, and therefore there's an inconvenience and has repercussions. But this idea that you're losing your wealth is quite wrong, because if you have a basis for saying that, listen, this is you can deposit all that money. Nobody's stopping you from depositing as many crores as you want, as long as you can legitimately account for it. Now you can claim that, listen, I've got 10 crores of cash, and the tax man is really the bad guy, and you'll see how many people agree with you. So I think it is very erroneous to say that your legitimate wealth is being attacked. And
Well,
indeed,
I can't get access to it. whatever there is in the account.
So again, the
Of course, you
criticism
can
is-
get access to it. It is reduced to
Write checks.
24,000 rupees of cash per person per week.
No, but you can issue checks.
And you can issue
You
checks.
can transfer.
They will accept, right?
Everybody accepts checks. Certainly
and
the
credit
people who
card.
have this wealth.
And you can transfer by credit card to anybody, to Paytm
Yeah.
or anything. So that
So
you have
that
to be
is
careful.
really...
Anyway,
So just
Yeah.
to say what was the original question is short term, medium term, long term impact, tweetable answer, and if at all you can give us a number.
On
If you
I gave
on
you-
GDP in 3 years from now.
1% GDP loss short term growth rate, and then medium term it could go even worse.
So your pet,
Hindu growth rate.
Dr. Virmani.
No, I've already told you 0.2% as of now. A month later, I will reevaluate. But just on the last question, remember they are expecting at most 2 to 3 lakhs crore, which will not be returned. That is the part which is expropriated. Please be careful.
Yeah.
Nothing else is expropriated.
Yeah, there's the
Okay.
that
It's in your account.
4 lakh crore.
You can use it.
Yeah.
I have used it. I have started Paytm. I had to. I haven't withdrawn anything. I transferred by credit card, and I have a Paytm account now. I'm using it.
So in 3 years from now, GDP, 2.5 years from now, GDP number.
No, I think there will be no effect unless these people are really incompetent, which I cannot rule out.
So you are feeling that it won't.
After a year,
accelerate.
there will be no effect.
So it'll grow
No
as
negative
normal.
More
effect.
positive, more positive. But the point is, I cannot judge right now after 2 weeks, because 2 weeks. Remember, I predicted that there's going to be a real problem.
Retail issue.
What I have to see is how quickly they recover. At least give me 2 weeks more of data.
And if they implement in the budget or before that or
Yeah,
after that,
right.
The
if they do
measures
nothing,
that
yes.
structurally change
Exactly,
things,
exactly.
then of course there could be a multiplier, right?
Absolutely.
So that's
that
what
will
you.
be a positive.
So I think, Dr. Bala, closing comments.
No, if they do the other reforms, and in the short term, so we don't have to wait very long, my interpretation and view and prediction is that this will be the biggest reform in India.
Plus how much?
Huh?
Roughly.
Biggest
Range.
reform in India, and it will make the 1991 reform seem like very mild. And we know they were not mild, they were major. So this thing has the potential of being mega. I think it'll be mega. In terms of the growth rate, it will accelerate the growth rate by about 1 to 2 percentage points
In the-
from whatever base you want.
Yeah.
You
In the
have
medium
the-
term or long term?
medium term, next 3
Okay.
years. And you can start off with that we are growing at 2%,
Yeah,
then it'll be
whatever.
4, whatever. So it's not the issue of the absolute amount of GDP growth rate, it's the acceleration, the delta will be huge. And one last prediction, since my good friend Ajay had brought in about China and all, as to that we were going back to the days of Mao. He didn't mention that we could be going back to the days of Deng. So as 1978 was remembered by the world, by all of us economists, etc., much after the fact actually, because we all there, we didn't think it was much of anything. I think 2016 is India's 1978.
Tax GDP ratio should be aiming at higher investment GDP ratios, and this will only get you. And also, reform also means knocking out a lot of the subsidies. The Prime Minister has taken some initial measures, but I think you got to follow through, because most of the subsidies are undeserved. Education, health, and all are subsidies which are deserved, but milk subsidies, gas subsidies, all mostly are undeserved, because who consumes these things? So I think there are lots of things to be done, but just taking one strike and saying that this is a reform like deregulation of 1991, and it's a little implausible. But I think there should be other steps. Like I'd like to see some reduction in I think individual families being given depreciation on their homes, on their vehicles, some kind of thing. Bring it on par so that consumption expenditure can go up again. Then your tax compliance gets better, because the tax is collected at source then. So some of these things you can start innovating and playing with. They're not thought of these things. This big surgical strike thing. is something which I don't think is going to work.
So I know there's been this thing doing the rounds that there'll be a new finance minister. We don't know. It's been in the, we've heard it 3 times in the last 2.5 years. How is the finance minister doing?
He's the guy who's meeting the Prime Minister. That is what makes me afraid. He's the guy who's inspiring Nitin Gadkari. He's the type, who's floating around in the circus talking to Sarsan Chalak. So, I think we have to be very careful.
That's what looking good in the larger electorate. You have to celebrate a guy who gave an idea. You can't be seen not sell. So that's a political thing.
He didn't celebrate, he didn't recommend demonetization. He said, take out. He did actually. But what you've done is not demonetization. He said, have only 100 rupee notes as the maximum.
Yes, he said, in fact, bring it down below 50. That's what he said. To be very specific.
But
that would have been an even bigger disaster.
Anyway, that's it.
We escaped. But I still like, Jetli is a man of the world. He's a corporate law, advises people on how to save taxes and all that. He should also try to see where you can give people breaks so that, you collect in the about terms, in the around, you give tax benefit on owning a car, but on buying a new car, then you collect it again. So these are the things that you can do.
Quick bite on this 30 months of the Prime Minister, almost halfway through. Quick bite on...
I think the good bites on is that, auction of...
Yeah, the spectrum was very...
Spectrum and coal and all these things. A good move. And I think there are some things which you need to carry by consensus. The Prime Minister's office is not endowed with a lot of power. It's endowed with a lot of authority. And you got to use that authority by using it as a pulpit to preach to people, to convert people, and say why certain, like on the gas, he tried his best. I don't think I agree with his figures, but he used that the way it should be used. He should be doing more of that.
And last, one of the things that I have noticed that this Prime Minister is staying away from Indian business people. He believes that he should not be seeking their counsel, their advice in a collective way for the good of the industry. Because ultimately you cannot create jobs without partnering with them. You talked about public money coming in, it has to partner with them. So what is there an advice for the Prime Minister on how he should deal with the entrepreneurs that want to do things in the right manner and have accepted that there is a change?
No, I think my problem with that is that he doesn't seek counsel from anybody, and including the major sectors of the economy. The businessmen who go around and run the Prime Minister's Council, I've said this on record also, are guys who are seeking favors and seeking concessions. And they have made their money by being associated with the government, by being parasites on the system.
Right.
Not by any value. That way Ratan Tata did great entrepreneurship by building a car and doing all kinds of things. None of these other guys do that. They want to...
Say one last thing.
Yes, sir.
Since he brought up China, the Chinese way of reform is meant to be you feel the stones as you cross the river.
So cautious.
Be very cautious, step by step, do pilot, do this,
Feel
do
the
that.
stones.
This is not anything like a Deng Xiaoping type of
The
reform.
guy who came up with that phrase, feel the pebbles,
if it was,
is the one guy who's got the biggest reform the world has seen in the fastest
That's what I
possible
mean.
manner.
That's what I
He
mean.
doesn't follow his own principles.
That's what I mean. But and also if it was the biggest reform since 1991, and nobody of the economic team was even consulted, then you got to really worry.
So Mr. Chipper, on this point of...
Who did Deng Xiaoping
So,
Everybody.
in terms of his having a dialogue with the business people, with entrepreneurs, because you cannot build the next new India if you do not engage with entrepreneurs.
That's right. I agree with that.
So, that is very disturbing. It's, of course, they took shortcuts in the past and there was crony capitalism. Nobody is denying that. But you don't have to do that. You can at least listen to them. You can have a dialogue. Ultimately, you can have your own pure, policy. So that's a disturbing thing.
Most of the guys, Ratan Tata just spoke up, most of the industrialists who've spoken up are fully in support of this. So
I'm not talking of this issue. I'm just, since you are here, I'm utilizing this to ask you about this specific. I had lunch with the top 20 industrialists on Monday, and and he's I would say relatively honest. Again, it's all relatively. I'm not saying he's dishonest, but I don't know. I'm saying he's relatively honest, but he's not engaging with anyone.
Yeah, I mean, you have very good people. I know Naushad Forbes quite well, and so people like him should be consulted.
So anyway, so we'll lock it. I hope it goes well for the sake of our country. It's early, 14 days. So thank you for making your time.